What's up, everyone, and how's it going today? Well, I want to cover this relatively quickly because I don't want to spend much time on it. This is a subject that has just been completely, depending on who you listen to, overblown or understated, the issue of COVID-19. And I mostly wanted to talk about the long-term dangers. There's a lot of ignorance out there. And when I say ignorance, I don't mean ignorance as if you're stupid because you don't know something. I mean, we are all ignorant to a new virus. The whole idea of a novel coronavirus is a new coronavirus. Now, I could sit here for half an hour and explain all the things I've learned about viruses, SARS and MERS, and how they were also coronaviruses, and trying to explain how a coronavirus operates or what exactly it is. It doesn't make a difference. The first thing I did when this pandemic started was I bought a 500-page book. It was like 400 pages. It was about, it was called Spillover. And it went on to talk about Ebola, SARS, MERS, and the potential for a new virus like this to take over. Now let's set aside for a minute the argument over whether it's man-made or whether it is natural. Let go of that complete bullshit argument because it doesn't matter. What really matters is how dangerous is it? Now, can we agree that it's a real virus? I think most of us can. A lot of people who believe that it's not real, well, their opinions don't exactly matter. Anybody out there who thinks this virus doesn't exist or that it's all a hoax, at this point is just a moron. So let's move past those people. Let's talk about the people who think that it's just a flu, okay? This is not just a flu, all right? Now, we have taken extreme measures around the world over the past several months in order to try and lessen the impact of this. The argument that's been made against that is that by locking down, we're causing more economic damage. We can't get to the doctor or the hospital for cancer treatments, for toothaches, for whatever it might be. This indeed is a huge issue. And I actually read an article that said that the deaths from cholera, just from the lockdown itself, might be worse than all the COVID deaths combined. People just don't comprehend how many people die from cholera each year. Or the people who are dying from a variety of different viruses. I mean, especially in areas where polio is still rampant. And I know a lot of people say, oh, Bill Gates is trying to kill everyone with polio vaccine. Look, if you've never met anybody or seen anybody with polio, you probably don't understand it. In America, we're pretty lucky here. But we're trying to wipe polio out the way we wiped out smallpox, at least for the most part. That's very difficult to do. And so a lot of people, this might end up causing more deaths from other causes than the virus itself. It's possible. So now that we've looked past that, the virus is real and that more deaths might be caused by lockdown, let's just say, okay, let's go back to life as normal. I can agree with this as well. I think that at this point, at least in my country, we have messed up so bad on our response. The only thing we can do is go back to our lives. In the meantime, there are very simple precautions we can take. One of them being to wear a fucking mask. And I'm sorry to say that again, but how hard is it to put a mask on your face when you are out there in public, in a place where other people are shopping, and the potential for you to be an asymptomatic carrier, not even be aware of it, is enough to say, hey, wear a mask, okay? Now, I've heard this argument several times. People say, well, you shouldn't breathe in your own carbon dioxide. It makes you sicker, and you're not getting enough oxygen. I'm like to say, get some science, my friends. Okay? Carbon dioxide is a gas. It does not just sit and saturate your mask and wait for you to re-inhale it. It doesn't work that way. In fact, the amount of oxygen in the air itself is very little compared to how much you might think. But I will admit that masks can be a little bit restricting, which is the whole point. Get a comfortable mask and wear it only in places where you need to. The idea is not to stop you from inhaling the virus. It's to stop your dirty ass mouth from not coughing out your fucking spittle while you're ranting as a Karen to the manager of the store about not having to wear a mask and spittle shooting out of your mouth. This is not new science, people. This was from the 1900s. In 1918, during the pandemic, they wore masks as well. We had the same debates. This is not new. It's a common respect, a courtesy for your fellow people. But it's not just about politics. When you have the president up there saying, "Oh, I won't wear a mask and I don't care about masks," fine. Let that idiot go out and spread his bullshit to all his people. But for the rest of us, we have to deal with the repercussions of you assholes who go out there into public and spread the virus around to other people. Because even us wearing a mask, I will agree with you, masks do not prevent you from getting sick. But they can stop your spittle from shooting out of your dirty ass mouth. So shut your fucking mouth, put your mask on, and do your shopping and go home. I don't know how else to say it. In other countries, even in some of the most fucked up countries, people cooperate with one another. In this country, it's become a partisan issue because of Trump. He's the only one not wearing a mask. Pence is wearing a mask even. All of his, the people in Congress and the Senate, they're wearing masks now. But no, not the president, because he's too fucking cool. Because his ego is so high that he would not be caught dead wearing a mask. He went to even visit a swab factory and only wore goggles. I mean, the goddamn pompousness of people who believe this shit is just beyond ridiculous. So is it a stupidity of species? Maybe. Maybe it's an inability to think critically or to believe in science. Perhaps it's a little bit of not trusting the experts. People think it's overblown or it's underblown. And so I'd like to talk about the long-term damage that can be done to your health. For all the people who are talking about this being just a flu virus, this was the main point I really wanted to make in this video. It's not it's not as simple as you might think. So I could sit here and spit my own thoughts, but I'd rather give you some science behind it. And this is from this doctor, is in Future magazine. If you had asked me a month ago if there was any published evidence that SARS-CoV-2, I should say this before I get off the Trump thing. I watched his speech the other night, I think it was last night, from a mega church in Arizona. Arizona has one of the highest rates of cases rising right now. They've doubled in the last week, I believe. He went down to look at his beautiful border wall and then to speak at a mega church. And what he said was, what does this COVID-19 even mean? He said, what is COVID? Where does that come from? And he said, why 19? Why isn't it some other number? Why 19? No, listen, if you're a Trump supporter, I know you're already pissed at me, but really, the President of the United States stood up in front of millions of people and said he doesn't understand what COVID-19 means. If you can't see the guy's a fucking buffoon by now, I mean, how can we even have a discussion? This is something that everybody, anybody in government who is, I wanted to say everybody in society, but most people are stupid as well. If you had asked me a month ago if there was any published evidence that SARS-CoV-2, or COVID-19 is the disease from it, of course, could cross the blood-brain barrier, I would have said no. But now there are many reports showing it absolutely can. In Japan, researchers reported a case of a 24-year-old man who was found unconscious on the floor in a pool of his own vomit. He experienced seizures while being rushed to the hospital. An MRI scan of his brain revealed acute signs of viral meningitis, inflammation of the brain, and a lumbar puncture detected. SARS-CoV-2 in his cerebrospinal fluid. So, let me repeat this. They found SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, in his cerebrospinal fluid. For anybody who knows any basic biology, they know that's a scary fucking thought, okay? That means that it crosses the blood-brain barrier. And Chinese researchers also found traces of the virus in cerebrospinal fluid of a 56-year-old male patient and in post-mortem examination of a patient in Italy. They found viral particles. Okay, it goes on and on. In fact, some scientists now suspect that the virus causes respiratory failure and death not through damage to the lungs, but through damage to the brainstem, the command center that ensures we continue to breathe when we're unconscious. This is basically meaning that COVID-19 could be similar to what's happening when you are dying from an opioid overdose. Your brain just cannot breathe. You're unable to breathe, not because your lungs are full of anything, but because your brain stops communicating. This is a scary thing, and people should be damn well aware of this, because right now we are having a huge outbreak, and that's why I'm talking about this again, because I'm disgusted with my fellow man who is ignoring this. It's a serious issue. It really is. Here's the next part. Other viruses have caused far more devastating long-term impacts. One of the most notorious was the influenza virus responsible for 1918 pandemic, which caused permanent and profound damage to the dopamine neurons of the brain and central nervous system. While it's long been assumed that influenza cannot cross the blood-brain barrier, sometimes scientists now think that it can. An estimated 5 million people worldwide were hobbled by a form of extreme exhaustion known as sleep sickness or encephalitis lethargica. Among those who survived, many remained in a state of suspended animation. They neither conveyed nor felt the feeling of life. They were as insubstantial as ghosts and passive as zombies, they wrote in the 1973 memoir, Awakenings. He describes patients remaining in this stupor for decades until their eventual death. Now, here's one from Gavi. It's the science site here. It says, a study of the long-term effect of SARS, which was the original SARS-CoV-2, is a new version of coronavirus, and I really don't want to explain that if people don't understand it already, showed that 2 years after they had the disease, 1 in 2 SARS survivors had much poorer exercise capacity and health status than those who had never had the disease. 1 in 2. That means half of people who had SARS were never back to their full fitness. You call that just a normal flu or a cold, right? Only 78% of SARS patients were able to return to full-time work 1 year after infection. After a full year. That means almost a quarter of people couldn't even return to work after a year because it fucked them up so bad. Another study also done in Hong Kong revealed that 40% of people recovering from SARS still had chronic fatigue symptoms 3.5 years after being diagnosed. Viral infections such as SARS and Epstein-Barr virus are known to trigger chronic fatigue syndrome that can last for months or years. A striking feature of COVID-19 is how long the symptoms can last. Early in the pandemic, initial medical advice on recovery times from mild COVID-19 has suggested 1 to 2 weeks. However, many people have seen symptoms last for 8 to 10 weeks or longer, and symptoms can seem to go away only to come racing back. 10 weeks. A research group at the King's College London, UK, developed a COVID-19 tracker app for people to record their symptoms daily, and an estimated 200,000 people have been reporting symptoms for the entire 6 weeks since it was launched. And the next part here, the condition, experts are concerned a significant proportion of people with COVID could be left with lung scarring, known as pulmonary fibrosis. Now, I'd like to note this is also being found in people who have mild symptoms and recovered quickly. Anybody who has had their lungs analyzed has found that they have these weird scarring. They call it glassing or something. I'll get to that. The condition is irreversible, and symptoms can include severe shortness of breath, coughing, and fatigue. NHS England said it was opening specialist rehabilitation centers. Retired taxi driver Anthony McHugh was admitted to a hospital on March 6th with coronavirus symptoms. He was placed on a ventilator for 13 days. I was feeling breathless, then I remember being rushed to I try to take these screenshots and only read the parts I wanted to read. One study from China found that the ground glass appearance, which is what it looks like on the MRI of the lungs, showed up in scans of 77% of COVID-19 patients. Another study showed 66 of 70 hospitalized patients had some amount of lung damage in CT scans, and more than half had the kind of lesions that are likely to develop into scars. Not just for critically ill patients, the authors found that out of 58 asymptomatic patients, 95% also had evidence of these ground glass opacities in their lungs. More than a quarter of these individuals went on to develop symptoms within a few days. And, how much more can I read? I can just sit here and read off all these things I saved. The point I'm trying to make is that this is a serious virus and a serious disease, and I feel like we've lost interest. We've lost our focus. We've lost our ability to work as a group to try to overcome this. I'd like to say for all the people who think that they're just too tough to wear a mask, or that they have some legitimate gripe about it, or that they don't need to social distance, that they can go to the bar, party out, fine. You have freedom, you're an American. But what I do want to say is this. In Europe right now, in many areas, they're opening back up their businesses, they're opening back up their cities, but they're doing it in a way where they're able to control the virus. Over here, we're opening up without having a fucking clue what we're doing because the president's a goddamn moron and he basically influences everybody to not give a shit. It's not just him, it's people in general. Their stubborn nature of just not understanding something, which is fine. You don't want to trust the experts, you don't want to believe science, then fine. But what's happening now is Europe is opening back up and they're shutting down travel from America. We have become the new third world country. And because of this, it's not just that Americans won't be able to take vacations to Europe, like I could care. Business will not be able to be done. Americans will not be able to travel for business needs. People will have to be quarantined every time they travel. This is going to kick us in the ass for the next couple of years in America, while the rest of the world moves on. So when people talk about their worries of globalization, don't worry. That's probably going to end because of this. Not because of anybody giving up, but because America is going to be left behind as the ignorant country where the people wouldn't wear masks. And when we look in the history books, what side of history do you want to be on? The morons or the people who made a fucking effort? Don't let your pride get in the way of putting on a goddamn mask when you go to a grocery store. Don't be an asshole. Those are my thoughts. Take care.